Hello, this is Mike Pucciarelli, where I'm the owner and creator of Still Life Photography at Michael Pucciarelli YouTube channel. And in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about the Canon R6. My first one, an introduction to who I am. I started, professional photography around 2010. I graduated from Montgomery College 2013. 2015, I joined PPA, Professional Photographers America. And I joined in 2017, I joined some of the affiliate clubs. In 2021, I received my craftsman degree in a virtual ceremony. And in 2022, I received my CPP certificate of professional photographers, CPP, certificate for the professional photographers. That's a great test. It's great learning, but I've been using, Canon 7D for years. I started out with the Rebel XTI, but then I moved over to Canon 7D, but I love the R6, and I'm very thankful for all the resources, online resources that I have to help me do this, like with the YouTube. And in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the Canon R6. It's a great camera. We've got some material to cover. First, I'm going to start with the camera diagram. And this is what the camera could look like. The diagram could look like when I do still life, where I could use more than one aperture. I could use aperture 8, aperture 16. I could use the shutter 1/25th or 1/250th. Sometimes I have to modify the shutter by cutting it in half to avoid overexposure, but sometimes I could, raise the aperture. And I always shoot in manual or bulb. Manual and still life, and bulb for light painting. And then I shoot in raw. I always shoot in raw because I want to get the most editing capability. And then I'm going to talk about all these settings. I'm going to talk about the AI focus. There's been some changes with the R6. And it's a wonderful camera. And if you look at the diagram here, where you see they have one, it could use multiple cards. It could use 2 cards. I've had 2 cards in, I would say 1 and 2. It also has interesting Wi-Fi. It also has a new way to use a camera. It's AF, and this is great if you want to focus on the face of a portrait. You can, when you enable this, you can enable eye detection, face detection, and subject detection. Now, with the R6, like the 7D, I'm still going to use a single shooting mode. I'm still going to use it for still life, also light painting. Sometimes I can use the 10-second or 2-second, but most of the times I like to use a single shooting mode. And for the outdoor photography, I like to just use maybe the single shooting mode, but when I do HDR, I could take single shots in bracket exposure using the H for high speed, or I could just use the regular, 10-second exposure and just take the shots, or I could just take the shots just one at a time in the bracketed mode. And I'll talk about bracketed mode later. I always like to use the standard picture mode. It's the sharpest. Sometimes you use the portrait or landscape. And then they have a new mode, A, which is to the left of the S in the yellow square. That's the intelligent mode. That's if you want to enable the face, the eyes. And I know some people use the monochrome for black and white. I don't. I do all my black and white in Photoshop. And I don't want to affect the pixels in any way with the monochrome, but I feel like, I like to use a standard picture for the picture mode. It's the sharpest, it's the best. It helps me out with my still life and light painting. Now, the focus mode, there's been some changes going from the Canon 7D to the R6. The R6 has zone autofocus, which is what I use. I still prefer this more than, the 1053 point AF. I know Canon had 19, but this is a big upgrade. But then there's vertical zone focus and there's horizontal. I like to just stay with the first three. And I may use the 1053 point focus. But, mirrorless has really, there's a big upgrade from the digital to the mirrorless. And I sometimes can use just the, 1053 point AF, but I still would like to use the zone autofocus for manual because it focuses it quicker and it helps me do my job. And I've experimented with the vertical zone and the horizontal. They're also good too. And then there's single point focus and spot autofocus. And, single point, you move the cursor, we apply the focus. And then there's spot autofocus. It's like for macro, it's like the single point of focus on steroids. And there's something new that the 7D does not have that this R6 does have. It's called tracking, where you got to make sure you have this set where you can have, face detection, subject detection. So the Canon R6 has been a big upgrade from the 7D and older cameras. The white balance, I either like to use a daylight option or I just set the Kelvin to 55 or 56 or whatever I want. Now the others are good too, like the cloudy, the shade, but a lot of times I just like to set the Kelvin for my still life photography, either to set it to 55K or 54 or maybe 58K. Or if I want to do outdoor, I just use the daylight option where I could just set the Kelvin. And then there's a custom white balance, and you just set by focusing on a white card in your focus. Sometimes I can do that, but if you have a new lighting condition, then you have to do the custom white balance. Now, I still never use AWS. I know a mirrorless this has changed. I know some people use AWS in video and they're happy. That's fine, but I don't. But there's also AWS capabilities too in the mirrorless. But I still would like to use, either the daylight option or I just set the Kelvin to 58K for whatever I want for my white balance. And the high-speed ISO noise reduction. For properly exposed image, I would just recommend you disable it. Low is also good to use. But technology today, I feel like you don't need to use standard. I feel like maybe you could use it for a very high ISO, but the technology today, you could take a very excellent picture with hardly any noise, but the very high ISO. But I like to try to avoid the use standard, but I know this way can be effective. But I think, if the image is properly exposed, I would suggest you don't use it. But if you're doing light painting where you might just want to change it to low, but the technology is advancing where, hey, there's software to take out noise, and there's ways you could tweak the R6 to get the image you like. Then the long exposure noise reduction. For properly exposed image, I recommend you disable it. For autos automatic, enable is algorithms are happening no matter what. And I would not use this setting because the camera may take a while to set, it may not, but I would like to disable this. But these settings are there if you need these, because in early DSLRs, they had where if you do long exposures, you may have blue color casts. But in today's world, you don't need to worry about it because technology is advancing. But these settings are there if you need to use it for your needs. Then there's color space. I always like to start with Adobe 1998 RGB. you have about 57 billion colors. That's a lot of colors. And then convert it to sRGB, then you're only stuck with 16.7 million colors. Big difference in colors. Now, about the sRGB, there's a few ways I like to use this. Is if you're copying in Photoshop, if you're going to copy and paste, I recommend that you don't check up the RGB so you won't mess up the color space. But if you're going to post to the web, I recommend you do check that. So, because if you don't check that off, if you do check this off and you copy paste in Photoshop, you could have a color mismatch problem. But if you copy and paste and don't have this option checked off before you click the OK, then you're fine. I know some people like the experience with ProPhoto RGB. That's over 281 trillion colors. Now, the human eye can only recognize over 2 or 3 million colors, but 281 trillion colors cannot be recognized by the human eye. I know technology is advancing where people may start to use ProPhoto, fine, but I still would like to just start with Adobe RGB and then convert to sRGB. And depending on how I'm going to use it, Photoshop do not have that sRGB checked when you use in Photoshop, but then when you copy it over the web, you want to have that checked off. And then the CMYK, it's great for printing, but then you're only stuck with 16,000 colors. But this is great for when you want to print. But I always like to start with, Adobe RGB and then convert to sRGB. And depending on how I'm going to use it, do not check or check off the sRGB option depending on how you want to use the JPEG. We're going to talk about the cropping aspect ratio. Since we're using full frame, it makes sense to use the full because you're using the full pixel effect power. Now, the 1.6 is great if you're using a C sensor lens, but you're not using all the pixel power. You don't use all the pixels. I mean, the other methods like 1.1, 4.3, 6.9 are great according to your needs, but the pixel power is affected, but you do what you need to do. And I always just recommend, hey, since we're using full frame, use full because you're using all the pixel power. Then there's auto exposure bracketing. And basically, this is great for shooting the same image with different exposures. And I like to use like one stop where you want to have the regular image maybe slightly underexposed by 2/3 of a stop so that you can work with the highlights a little better, because if you don't, you'll have a hard time working with the highlights. There'll be no data to work with. And I'll talk more about auto exposure bracketing with this camera, which is a big upgrade from 7D. You can work with more than 3 files. And then there's our AF, continuous AF. Now, when you first buy your camera, they're going to enable this. So that's when you turn on the camera, it's always, focusing. It's always trying to focus. That's why if you disable this, you focus when you want, and it won't always be continually focusing. If you were to enable it, it's always going on and off and on and off. With this, then the sensor is always going to be focusing. So when you disable this, you focus when you want, and the thing won't be going on and off. Like I said, it's better to disable the AF because you're in control of the focus, not the camera. Always adjusting the focus. Another way to even do this, you can even just switch the lens to manual, and you do the same thing. And then if you note that the AF method is intelligent, where it's a second line where it says AF method. In this mode, you can enable eye detection and also the subject. And this is a powerful feature in the Canon R6. In terms of increments for shutter, aperture, ISO, I like to use 1/3 increments for everything. Now you can use 1/2, but I just like to use 1/3 because 1/3, 2/3, full stop, 1/3, 2-stop, full stop makes more sense. And I always like to use 3 brackets for HDR. Now, this is where number of bracketed shots, you could use like 9 shots, 11. You can use more than 3. That's a powerful feature on this camera. It's a big upgrade from, the Canon 7D. Here's a powerful feature of the Canon R6. You can record 2 cards at the same time. You can switch from card 1 to card 2 when card 1 is full. Now, some people do this, and I'm thinking about doing this. You have card 1 and card 2. You record both cards at the same time for backups. And I did experiment. It works great. All you have to do is just affect the settings. If you look at the lower caption, it says standard auto switch card, record separately, record to multiple. If you're using 2 cards, you want to record to multiple, use record to multiple. Or you can also record separately too, but and the camera will work with 2 cards, the SDXC and an HDSC. The secure digital extended capacity, it's more advanced than the lower card. It has great speed and performance. It has better speed and performance, and you have more storage. You have up to 2 terabytes. It's also 10 times faster than the lower card. The lower card's good too, the secure digital high capacity, where the card could store up to 32 gigabytes of data, where if you look at the card above it, it's 2 terabytes. So there's a big difference. But it has great data speeds at 10 megabits of data, transfer speeds. But the card above it, the SDXC, it's 10 times faster than the SHDC. So these are my, my photography Facebook groups. I have a still life fine art photography group. It's growing every day. And I try to host events. And I use Facebook and Twitter all the time, and Instagram. I have an architect, design, and cityscape Facebook groups. And some of the groups I'm doing by myself, some I'm running with other people, like there's a photography display international group. It's going to display fine art in many ways. Then there's sculpting with light, where if you want to just learn some light painting. And then there's your dramatic product photography creative group, where you can produce a dramatic headshot, a dramatic product shot. Then there's a marvelous landscape photography group, where if you just want to post some beautiful landscapes. And I'm also working on several meetup photography groups, where, the DC Metro A&N, dramatic product, DC photo. I try to host events there too. And then these are my business links, my Facebook, my Instagram, my Google, my LinkedIn, my Twitter, and my fine art website, my photography website. My fine art website sells fine art photographs of still life, light painting products, outdoor lighting. I love waterfalls. I love outdoor views. And my photography sells, I'm trying to get into black and white portraiture and also product photography. And then there's my YouTube. And this is where I store all the recordings. So in this channel, I have all the recordings. I have this YouTube channel divided into 5 sections. We have, a section on the white flex table, a section on the black flex table, a section on light painting, a section on software, and a section on equipment. So they're all there. They update this. I try to do like a monthly basis, like at least 1 or more a month. If you like more videos like this, I ask that you maybe like and subscribe to this channel. So if there are any questions, you can always email me at mpucciarelli2016@gmail.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me with Instagram, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, or just send me a message through my websites. You can also get in touch with me. Just send a message to me in my Facebook groups or my meetup groups. So thank you for listening to this webinar. It was my pleasure to give it. Stay tuned for more updates with videos on YouTube channel Still Life Photography of Michael Pucciarelli. Thank you for listening.